Max Payne is a game that was highly influential, but people don't seem to realize it. It came out in 2001, and it's a game that has been fondly remembered throughout history, and it came out during a good year for shooter games. 2001 also included Halo Combat Evolved and Return to Castle Wolfenstein. Difference is that Max Payne was a third-person shooter. Max Payne wasn't the first third-person shooter. You had games like Winback released before it, but the controls and gameplay in those games wasn't up to par with first-person shooters. So Max Payne could have gotten away with just being the first third-person shooter with fluid controls, but it decided to take a step even further than that in both gameplay and story. I guess you could say that Max Payne popularized third-person shooters. I mean, because of Max Payne, third-person shooters became a viable genre of video games. Kinda like how Doom made FPS a viable genre. What I'm trying to say is that Max Payne is one of the most influential shooting games ever made, and it is definitely the most influential third-person shooter game ever made. But what about the game itself? Does it still hold up over 17 years later? Does it still even compare to modern day TPS games despite pretty much giving birth to the genre and the genre having a huge amount of time to improve? Only way to find out is through. For anyone interested, this retrospective will be spoiler free until this time code in the video. Until then, I will be focusing on the majority of the gameplay and only the first 10 to 20 minutes of the story. So if you want to play this game, then not much will be spoiled for you. There are some aspects of the gameplay that I won't be able to talk about without potential spoilers, so certain criticisms I have with the gameplay will only be said in the spoiler section. With that said, let's get into the game. The game opens up with a cutscene showing a helicopter flying across the ocean and, oh look, the Twin Towers. This game was released in July 2001, and other versions that were released later removed them due to, well, you know. We then see police converge on a building as the camera pans up, and we get some dialogue from the title character.
They were all dead. The final gunshot was an exclamation mark to everything that had led to this point. I released my finger from the trigger, and then it was over.
The game flashes back 3 years into 1998. All the Max Payne games take place in the modern day, so the main game takes place in 2001. We get to see Max just as a regular dude before shit hit the fan. Now, Max Payne uses comic book panel / graphic novel cutscenes, which I love, as the game has the sort of pace and dialogue of a comic book. It also gives the game a very unique form of storytelling that I haven't seen done since. The only two games that I can think of that have a similar style of storytelling to this game are Ultimate Spider-Man and Max Payne 2, The Fall of Max Payne. And surprisingly, it holds up because of that. Barely any other games tells its story in this fashion. The main reason why the developers decided to go with this style is because, as you may notice, graphics and animations in video games in 2001 were still not the best. And so it would be kinda hard to tell the story effectively with robotic AI and muddy graphics. I mean, there are still in-game cutscenes, but the vast majority are comic panels where they use stand-ins. The characters in these panels are actual developers who worked on the game. The most notable one is Max Payne himself, who is played by the writer of the game, Sam Lake. His face has become a running joke as it is ridiculous, but Sam has a lot of expression that adds quite a bit to the character of Max, which is something later games in the series kinda lacked. Another reason they chose it is because it means that if the story needed to be changed, they didn't have to animate texture and model new environments to fit the new story. And instead they could just get some devs in some outfits and get them in specific positions, and then add some artwork and some effects afterwards. This also means that they didn't have to spend as much money building and changing the story, and also panels could be added or switched around at any time. Remedy chose wisely. The comic book panel cutscenes helped them out with the budget, storytelling, and it also gave them a unique style that hasn't been done since. I mean, even in a game like Ultimate Spider-Man, the comic panels are used in a very different way. Anyway, Max comes home to find spray paint in the shape of a V with a syringe, and blood everywhere. He continues throughout the house and hears screaming coming from the bedroom. he finds that his baby and his wife have been murdered. Some may criticize this opening for not giving enough character development to the wife and baby, but the story isn't about them, it's about Max. Sam Lake has said himself that the reason why most of their games are named after the main character is because the entire game is about them. They're the main focus. The game doesn't linger on these deaths because it doesn't need to. This scene is supposed to show how it affects Max and how that causes the events of the game. 3 years later, Max transfers from being a cop to being undercover in the DEA. Max gets a tip from someone named BB that his old friend Alex wants to meet. On his way there, he finds that mobsters who work for a mob boss named Jack Lapino are killing a bunch of people at the train station, so Max decides to fuck them up and eventually finds out that this was a big heist going down and eventually catches up with Alex, only for Alex to then be shot in the head.
There was nothing I could do. He was dead. I could tell by the empty, accusing stare of his eyes.
Oh really, Max? That's how you know he's dead? Max then fights his way out of the train station, and I think this is a good time to talk about the gameplay in Max Payne. Max Payne is a third-person shooter, and it was one of the first, if not the first, to have fluid controls. In fact, I'd even say that the controls in this game are much better than modern TPS games. The thing I like the most is how the camera interacts with the actual character. Instead of the camera moving independent of the camera moves with the character, which looks silly out of camera, but it's about what's fun and not about what's realistic. This allows Max Payne's gameplay to be a lot more fast-paced than other TPS games, as the character doesn't have a set speed on how fast they can turn or a separate animation. Max can just turn and look wherever he wants to on the flip of a switch. Max Payne also doesn't use a cover system like a lot of TPS games did in the late 2000s and early 2010s. Max Payne's gameplay is sort of like a 3D bullet hell. The main inspiration for the gunfights in this game was John Woo films like Hardboiled. They even have a difficulty named Hardboiled, so it's easy to see where the influences came from. Max Payne's gameplay is all about mobility, constantly being on the move. There is a crouch button, but you can't move whilst crouched, so it's only useful for ducking and quickly reloading your gun. The thing I like is that Max Payne's bullets are actually projectile based, as you can see right here. They aren't slow, but due to the player being able to slow down time, it means that they can dodge incoming bullets if skilled enough. You also get to carry like 15 different guns, which are all extremely badass to use. You have pistols, SMGs, sniper rifle, machine guns, shotguns, and a baseball bat. Max can also shoot dodge, which allows him to move from cover to cover whilst lowering the risk of being shot. There's also the painkiller system, which is awesome and works well with keeping a good pace whilst also being able to punish the player when they make mistakes. Although it makes no logical sense, like Max can take 500 bullets to the face as long as he keeps using painkillers. Despite blood literally pouring out of 500 holes in his head, he can still live. I guess the health meter is supposed to represent how much pain Max can take, and he's only able to die once he succumbs to the pain. Now you may be asking, but if that's the case, then wouldn't this game be super easy? Well, it would if it wasn't for a couple things. First, even though Max has crazy fast reflexes, he's still just a human who can die. I mean, in the game it takes like a maximum of 3 to 5 shots to kill Max. Sometimes shotgun blasts will just kill him instantly. There's also the fact that the level design is great. It allows the player to move around enough and also provides some areas for the player to take cover if they feel like they're about to become a corpse. The enemy placement in this game too is good. You see, back in 2001, AI wasn't the most advanced thing ever, so in order to make a game challenging, you needed to have good level design and good enemy placement, and also good item placement. The enemies in this game are set up in specific areas, which allows multiple ways for Max to ambush them, and multiple ways for them to ambush Max. The item placement is also really good, and it rewards players who explore the levels a bit. It also doesn't give you too much, as then it would make the game way too easy, so it gives you just enough to get through if you play smart. The levels in Max Payne were designed for you to play them in like an infinite amount of ways, and even without bullet time you can still play through the level in a variety of different ways. All bullet time does is give you even more options. It also helps the player avoid taking damage in certain instances because they can react to certain enemies or objects in the environment before something actually happens. Max Payne would still be a great game without bullet time, it would just be less unique and overall less memorable. The thing about Max Payne's gameplay is that it's kind of designed like a puzzle. Each enemy is placed in a specific location and you have to think about what weapons to use, when to use bullet time, and when to conserve bullet time. That's where most of the challenge comes from in this game, and it does require quite a bit of critical thinking to get through, as Max Payne is one of the hardest shooting games ever made. I like games that test my skills, and Max Payne is one of those games, even if sometimes it is testing my patience as well. Because as good as Max Payne's gameplay is, there is one flaw that is even debatable whether it's a flaw or not, and that is the adaptive difficulty. Max Payne has a difficulty that registers how much ammo you have, how much health you have, how many painkillers you have, the amount of enemies you kill, and stuff like that. It's kind of like a less advanced version of the director AI in Left 4 Dead, so the game will get easier or harder depending on how well you're doing. The issue is the way it was coded. The difficulty was coded in a way so that if you're even half decent at the game, then the difficulty will rise to the point of being fucking impossible, in which case you would have to let yourself die a few times to let the difficulty adjust. Basically, Max Payne will always be a hard game no matter how good you are at it, but not exactly for the best reasons. Now, the reason why I say this is debatable is because some people say that this is an extra layer of critical thinking in the gameplay, and trying to figure out when to die and when not to die, which is interesting, but not something I necessarily agree with. Luckily, the adaptive difficulty shuts off when you're playing hard-boiled or Dead on Arrival. Dead on Arrival only allows you to save a certain amount of times, but for some reason my version of the game is bugged so that I can save as much as I want. Great. But even though you can play on difficulties without the adaptive difficulty, you still have to play through the game first with the adaptive difficulty, so the criticism still stands. Luckily in Max Payne 2 they removed the adaptive difficulty and just had a set difficulty. I mean, it was an interesting idea to have an adaptive difficulty, but I just prefer having the difficulty be consistently hard rather than too easy or just flat out bullshit. Another thing about this game is that when you're rolling around, it is insanely hard to take damage. This is because during the animation, bullets can't hit Max, and there is only one frame between the animation ending and restarting where Max can actually take damage. But at the same time, you can't attack during the animation, so it isn't exactly bullshit. Another thing is that when you shoot dodge, Max gets up as soon as he hits the ground, which is annoying because sometimes the enemy is shooting at you and you can't shoot back as Max is getting up, which means that the enemy will just keep firing into Max until he dies. It's frustrating as hell. Luckily they fixed it in later games. At least you have quick saves and you can save at any point, so instead of having to do an entire combat arena over again, you can just focus on specific encounters if you want. Another thing is I feel the melee combat can be abused a bit too easily, as you could in some instances just hide behind a door and then smack the enemies up as they come, unless they throw a grenade. My other criticisms can't be talked about without bringing up spoilers, which we are about to get into, so if you are thinking about playing this game and don't want big spoilers, then tune out now. Alright, now at the time of release, Max Payne was considered to have one of the best stories in video games. I would have agreed back then, but I'd say we've had better since. But I'm not here to compare. I'm here to find out whether or not the game has aged well. So we know that Max Payne's storytelling has aged well with its comic panels and very poetic dialogue.
Outside, the mercury was falling fast. It was colder than the devil's heart, raining ice pitchforks as if the heavens were ready to fall. We come to you now live from the crime scene.
Who is this?
Right back at you.
This is Deputy Chief Jim Bravura from the NYPD. You are to cease your criminal activities and surrender immediately.
Sure thing, Jim. Me and the boys have been talking and everyone's real sorry. They'll never do it again.
Ladies and gentlemen, it's the pain in the butt. Pain to the max.
You're killing me. Did you make that up yourselves or you get some wine out downstairs to come up with it? Don't answer that. A rhetorical question. And then I was dodging bullets like raindrops.
Are you freaking kidding me? It's just one lousy cop. You better be freaking kidding me. Whack him. What's the freaking problem?
Vinny Gognitti was running scared. He could run, but with a bullet in his stomach like a broken bottle of Tabasco, he was quickly running out of time. Gognitti ran out of steam in a dead-end alley with steam boiling out of the sewer grates like all the fires of hell were burning high beneath us. It was shakedown time.
I'd blow you away without batting an eye.
Sure, and you can check out my credentials splattered all over this joint.
Pleased to meet you. I'm Frankie the Bat Niagara.
Niagara, as in you cry a lot? Punchinello was burning to get me. The feeling was mutual. He was trying to put out my flames with gasoline. Punchinello wanted pain. He'd see the pain. He was trying to buy more sand for his hourglass. I wasn't selling any.
Like seriously, I use quotes from this game in my everyday life. But what about the actual story and characters? Well, Max Payne's story is basically just about a man who lost his wife and child and then goes after those responsible. According to Daniel399 on GameFAQs, Max kills 660 people in the first game, which is 584 more people than John Wick killed in his first movie. Holy fucking shit, dude. John Wick is fucked if he gets into a fight with this guy. Anyway, that's the story. Now obviously there is a lot more to it than that, but that's the basic structure. After Alex gets killed, Max is suspected of murder and the police try and hunt him down. During Act 1, Max takes down Jack Lapino and all of his mob. He then confronts Mona Sachs, who doesn't really have much presence in this game. I mean, she's only in 2 scenes, and she doesn't even have an in-game character model from what I know, but it does go to show that Max isn't the only one out here for revenge. Mona would then play a bigger part in the sequel. Mona does not want Max getting in the way, and slips some drugs in his whiskey. We then get a nightmare sequence with Max. Now, the nightmare sequences I really like. They show us what's really in Max Payne's head, and that he feels he was responsible for the death of his wife after he brushed her off one morning when something serious happened. That's why we see a vision of Max killing his wife here, and we even hear Max yelling, "Murderer! You killed her!" Because he truly feels like he was responsible for his wife's death. It's quite interesting, and I do like how it breaks up the shooting. However, the whole follow the blood trail thing is just boring. Max also hears things that go on in the real world happen in his dreams, which allows the dreams to be such a shift in tone without feeling disconnected from the game. Max then wakes up to find himself tied to a chair. A lot of people seem to think that Max Place, what the fuck? Now a lot of people seem to think that Max Payne takes place over the course of one night. This is because it's always nighttime in the game, but actually Max Payne takes place over the course of 3 days. I just always assume that when Max gets drugged and passes out, he sleeps through the day and wakes up at the night. Max cracks some jokes at Frankie and gets his head beaten in with a baseball bat. He has to then use the baseball bat covered in his own blood to fight his way out.
Without a gun, I'd be no match for Frankie's men. I'd have to play hide and seek with them.
Really, nigga?
Max then beats the fuck out of Frankie and then meets up with Vladimir Lem, who is actually played by Marco Saristor. I don't know how you pronounce the name. He is actually the singer for the band Poets of the Fall, who would later write their first song in Max Payne 2. Max then cuts a deal with Vlad that if he can get a boat from Boris Dime, then he will give him all the weapons he needs. Now to some people this may be seen as a filler level, and it kind of is, but at least the levels are fun to play, so it's good filler. After that, Pain in the Butt decides to try and get Angelo Punchinello, the head of the Punchinello crime family, off guard and sets up a meeting at the Don's restaurant, which gets blown the fuck up. Which it kinda seems weird that you're gonna blow up a whole restaurant just to try and kill Max Payne, but you could argue that Max is a huge threat and that he needs to be taken out in any way necessary. Vlad then takes Max to the Punchinello Manor, which Max fucks up the place, and then gets caught by Nicole Horn, who is actually played by Sam Lake's mother. Max then gets drugged with a lethal dose of the V drug, which we previously saw spray painted on the wall, and then the best fourth wall break in any video game happens.
There was something disturbingly familiar about the letter before me. The handwriting was all pretty curves.
You're in a computer game, Max.
The truth was a burning green crack through my brain, weapon statistics hanging in the air glimpsed out of the corner of my eye, endless repetition of the act of shooting, time slowing down to show off my moves, the paranoid feel of someone controlling my every step. I was in a computer game. Funny as hell, it was the most horrible thing I could think of.
Max then wakes up. Wait a minute, I thought it was a lethal dose. How is he not dead? Oh wait, it's Max Payne. Who cares? Max then decides Horn is his new enemy and heads for the Cold Steel factory and finds some interesting stuff, which I will talk about later. The place blows up. You may also notice a nod to Duke Nukem 3D. Max Payne actually started development the same year Duke 3D came out. Anyway, Max gets a call from BB, and it's obvious that he's the one who killed Alex and framed Max. There is some subtlety involved in it, however, by the fact that it took 3 years for anything to come up. What else has BB been doing all this time? Max then fucks him up and gets a call from Alfred Woden to meet at the Asgard building. Alfred introduces Max to the Inner Circle, where he says that if Max kills Horn, then they will make all the charges against him go away, and then the killer suits come in and blow the place to Kingdom Come. Max then sees that Woden is still alive, and Max fights his way through the building. Max now has a name and a face to go on, Nicole Horn. He spends some time building up the rage inside him, and this is where the story gets strange. Max states that the Acer Corporation has enough weaponry to start World War III. Now, this could be true or just an exaggeration, but he decimates everyone inside the building and even beating an attack helicopter. I mean, Max is badass, but the tone just feels kind of weird and feels out of place compared to the rest of the game. The level design and enemy placement here isn't good either. They'll constantly have enemies just camp around corners or have them shoot you from a mile away. This is my least favourite part of the game, as it has poor design and just feels very out of place compared to the rest of the story. Anyway, Max eventually meets Mona again, and she says that she is doing the same thing Max is, before then getting shot in the head and dying in the elevator. After killing some more dudes, the elevator comes back and no body. Just a lot of blood. Apparently someone on the development team didn't want Mona to die, so they left it ambiguous. Max then takes the elevator up and fucks up some dudes and then comes to the roof, where he decides to take out all the ropes, keeping the radio tower steady, and then shoots the thing, making it fall down on the helicopter which Nicole is leaving in. Badass! Max then walks to the edge and says the same line from the beginning, and then gets taken into custody as Woden watches from the crowd. By the way, this right here is the most badass ending to any video game ever. But there is more to Woden than just being the guy who saves Max in the end. Earlier in the game, you can find a diary by a prostitute that talks about a man with an eye patch, and his name is Alfred. Later in the game, you can find a VHS and even a secret dungeon that shows off the kink that Alfred is into. There's also some references to Star Trek and video game development jokes in this TV show. Now, this whole kinky sex thing was set up by Nicole Horn as a way to blackmail Alfred Woden into keeping silent. Alfred leaked the info out of desperation to the district attorney's office, of which it was then read by none other than Michelle Payne. Horn knew of this and sent some V-drug addicts to kill his wife, and they also killed a child. So in a way, Alfred Woden is responsible for the death of Max Payne's wife and child. He's the entire reason the story exists. When he saves Max at the end, he doesn't do it because it's the right thing to do. He does it out of guilt. Woden has nothing to gain from saving Max, but he feels as if it's owed. That's why he wanted Max to kill Horn, because it benefits both parties. Max Payne's story has quite a bit of layers. It can be interpreted as a simple revenge story, or a deep story about a man who caused pain and misery to someone else's life, and then helps him out because of guilt. It's something that really ties the story up in a neat bow. Max Payne would get a sequel in 2003, but in all honesty, it didn't need one. The story had enough charming characters and mystery to hold its own weight. I love Max as a character as he kinda reminds me of myself. His worldviews and sarcastic, cocky tone is what makes him a great character. He has aged extremely well. and so has the story, gameplay, storytelling, and music. There isn't too much music in this game, but it fits the tone, and is fucking badass. Overall, Max Payne isn't perfect, but then again, no game is. And neither is the character himself perfect. He constantly makes mistakes and gets the shit beaten out of him. And if you hadn't guessed it already, yes, this is my favourite video game of all time. Or at least it was, until the fall of Max Payne.